Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app.
This episode is proudly sponsored by Integrity Life. If the last few years have taught us anything, it's that life is unpredictable, which is why you need to work with a partner that's flexible and loves to collaborate. One that will personalize the claims experience for your clients, one with a balanced approach to underwriting, and one with a competitive and sustainable pricing. Integrity, your partner for life. If you want to learn more about how Integrity is your partner for life, head to integritylife.com.au/XY. G'day, Clayton here from XY, chatting with Renato. Mate, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure, Clayton. Good to be here.
Yeah. So a lot's going on in financial services. A lot's been going on since about, at least as far as I'm aware, since about 2013 with FOFA. But you've been in this game for a little bit longer than me, so you could probably take that date even further back. But there has been such huge changes. And at a high level, what do I see? I see big institutions, like the banks getting out of financial services. I see the former largest financial services company, AMP, selling off or attempting to sell off parts of the company. And then I see the other large company, which is the IOOF. I see taking almost zigging when everyone else is zagging. And that to me is, I think, a moment of optimism for the industry, because while everyone else is, running away, you guys seem to be taking a different path and a different approach. And if I sort of think about a bit of your background and the fact that you and your team are taking a very different approach, the chance to sort of sit down and ask why you and your team have a different view of financial advice compared to the other large institutions, I just thought that would be such an amazing conversational piece. So I guess first and foremost, can we start off with where you started in your career and what sort of dictates, the view that you have financial advice today?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. It's a big question, and I'll try and do it justice in a reasonably succinct way. Look, I think my career's been a function of hopefully a bit of methodical planning and goal setting, but equally, a fair dose of luck and good fortune in being in the right place at the right time. I actually grew up in country Victoria, and growing up in the Latrobe Valley, which is just very industrial, lots of power stations, I sort of was heading towards the latter part of high school, wanting to be an engineer. And I think, again, probably through good fortune as much as anything else, I sort of changed tack and decided to go down the business route, business and international economics route, which I think is quite fortuitous. Loved it, really enjoyed finance, enjoyed economics, and then worked at a couple of different banks. But I think what the piece that was probably a bit of good fortune is when one of my first corporate roles at National Australia Bank, which was in mergers and acquisitions, I very quickly, it was at the time when the banks were really looking at all things wealth. So this is late 90s, early 2000s. And I sort of became a bit of the wealth specialist. And that's where I really gained a real understanding of what was wealth management and what was the role it played. Having worked on the NAB's acquisition of MLC, worked on a couple of other transactions that probably didn't proceed, that was when I really got the bug for wealth. I then actually went off into investment banking just to expand my industry horizons, and worked in healthcare and general industrials and utilities, and frankly, found that all pretty boring compared to wealth. Wealth, I came back to, was really dynamic. There was a lot going on, a lot of change. But most important of all, and this probably comes back to my own upbringing, you could see the role, you could actually feel the role and the difference wealth management as an industry made to people's lives. It's actually about helping people live better lives. And that sort of connection stuck with me. And that led me to IOOF, which in 2003. And the rest is sort of history, as they say. And I've got to say that the one thing that drives me at IOOF and has been a key compass for me has been the purpose of the organisation. The fact that whilst some would rightly say that we've grown quite rapidly in the last 5 to 10 years, The organisation's been around for over 170 years,
Yeah.
and the genesis of it was actually a group of people in the community creating a society to support each other. So it was a mutual. It was people getting together to look out for each other and support each other in a time of need, and that purpose and that ethos is as important today as it was then.
Yeah, and off the top of my head, the Inordinate Oddfellows.
Independent Order of Oddfellows.
That's it. I remember looking at that once and thinking, goodness gracious. And there was a couple of those, I guess you would say, fellowships. I know it in not Centennial, at Hyde Park here in Sydney. On one of the corners, there is a statue that was erected by one of these types of societies, like 150 years ago. And imagine those early founders 150, 160 years ago looking at IOOF now, they'd be like completely blown away, right? It's that's a really cool story. The fact that you can link the historical purpose of the company back to your own upbringing. So you say you're from like a small town where community was quite strong, I'd imagine.
Yeah, so I was it was a semi-small town, so it was 25,000 people. So okay. Traralgon, which was in the Latrobe Valley. But always, we're a very close family. So certainly the family values was a big part of my life and still is today. So that, I was fortunate to have parents who I think gave me some pretty good financial disciplines that still live with me today. And I think one of the challenges for our industry is that not everyone has that benefit or that luxury. And I think everyone deserves the right to have financial confidence and have confidence in their future. And I think the industry, that's a big part of what the industry should be delivering to society more generally. And I think there's a great opportunity for IOOF and for the industry as a whole to play a bigger part in that in supporting the community. That's
a really good way of putting it. In fact, it's always interesting. And when you called it the bug for wealth, I thought that was a really interesting way of putting it, because it is such a peculiar interest, but when it does bite you, it sort of it keeps its fangs in. I think it's because it's this amazing combination of, I guess, financial and analytical, and then on the other side, completely emotional, and you can see the outcomes, as you mentioned earlier. And that sort of combination is very interesting. It's not in a lot of different industries. So if I think about sort of going back to where IOOF considers it can play a role across the industry. So there's a lot of people that don't get advice, as we're both very aware of. I personally got into financial planning because I got the bug for wealth via accounting, and then into financial planning. And what's kind of led me into XY Advisor is I knew that I could impact, say, about 100 people, maybe 150 if I really wanted to be busy. And sort of I was, by about 3-4 years into my company, I was already at about that 40-50 person mark. And I was thinking, I can really only just double or maybe triple the impact that I can have. And what really appealed, and I felt like I'd done a lot of hard work. And I almost felt like I was not doing enough with all the hard work that I'd put in to get to where I was. And so I went, how can I leverage the information that I now know? And that kind of, in a weird way, continued down to where XY Advisor is today. But even with that, our community now is about 4,000 strong, and we're looking, internationally to grow it even further. But there is still, there's a natural cap. The way that IOOF and the way that I'm sort of looking at the plays that you guys are doing, that are public, it makes me think you're aiming not just for the 15% of people that are getting advice. You're kind of looking at the 85% and going, why not? Is that sort of accurate?
Yeah, it is. I like your term, why not? And that's the question. Why don't those people deserve to have a proposition that helps them in a way that's affordable to them? Now, that help will look different and will be very different for someone it will be based on their age, their wealth, their life needs. So it needs to be customized. But I think we sometimes fall into the trap of talking about advice in a very narrow context. So we talk about advice as a holistic relationship that is full service. But there are other forms of assistance or help that people can benefit from that may not be a holistic, personalized financial advice relationship. It may be purely budgeting, it may be financial literacy, it may be coaching, but they are all forms of advice. And by advice, I use the generic sense of the word in helping people, assisting people make better decisions. I think we would benefit as an industry from broadening our interpretation of what advice is, and then leveraging technology to deliver that in more scalable and therefore more affordable ways for the benefit of everyone and benefit of society generally.
Yes. How is that achievable? So advisors are so hamstrung with how things are set up. Now we've got, the ASIC paper that's just out, 332, I believe, off the top of my head, talking about scalability of advice and, how can we overcome these complaints? I think a lot needs to happen on that side. I think in order to achieve what, this why not 85% or having this true impact, which, by the way, I love, right? Because why does only 15% of people have access to this kind of thing? I mean, if there was a way to get personal training into the hands of everyone in Australia, or as many people that want it as possible, you'd be doing it. And funnily enough, I think I see Thor, what's his name? Chris Hemsworth. I think he's got like a workout app now, and it's flooding into the market, this sort of mass, personal training. And so the mass financial planning, I think, is, and in all the different versions of advice, as you mentioned, and I fully agree, we're trying our hardest to get it out there, but there is natural restraints at a rules and regulations level that I just don't know how it's achievable. So is there anything that you can share with us today that you see as a potential way for advisors, for IOOF, for whoever, to get out there and play a bigger impact in society?
There is no silver bullet. I think there are different elements to the solution. One is regulation. However, I think technology is a very, very big part of the solution. I think one of the, let's call it, the criticisms I'd have of the industry, and I'd include IOOF in this, is I think we've tried to solve for tomorrow's opportunity with yesterday's thinking. So we've taken I think we've used the thinking and the models that have brought us this far to try and solve for the opportunity of tomorrow. And I'm not sure that's going to do it. So, for example, I think we've tried to go from a holistic advice model and try to scale that down. Mm-hmm. When in reality, maybe we should start with a blank sheet of paper and build something that's fit for purpose. The reality is that the industry, the advice industry, over the past 10 or 15 years or more, has had a very strong product orientation. So if you go to the origins of our financial planning industry, it probably originated largely out of life insurance and selling products. What we're saying very clearly, and I think this has certainly been the case since FSRA in the early 2000s, but certainly since FOFA, is that we need to divorce advice from product. So that is a very big shift, and I think our thinking needs to shift to ensure we capitalise on the opportunities that creates.
Yeah. That line especially resonates with me. XY, we're certainly no large outfit, and we keep our, what would you call it? Our advocacy to a very small, narrow subset. The thing that we took on about 18 months ago was the idea that upfront statements of advice should be tax deductible. And super interestingly, after sort of diving into that for a while, we looked at what the industry had done in the past, which was lobby politicians, whereas we sort of went down the ATO in court route, challenging the tax determination 95, which other industries had successfully done that. And so we were like, well, why don't we just follow that strategy if it's worked for other industries? If and when that is successful, obviously it's not 100% chance of being successful, and we'll pivot and go a different way if that doesn't work. But the other, or I guess I should say the second, because I only ever want to do one at a time, it takes way too long. The second one that I want to take on is this idea that financial advice within the legislation is understood to be an investment plan, and that products and advice are linked inextricably. And that definitely needs severing. So the way that you talk about it is sort of the way that I think about it as well. So if and when we sort of take that on, I'll probably come back around and email your assistant, see if we could organize something. But it's a great idea and it needs to get looked at. And I think that could potentially be in the road. However, again, I sort of look at what IOOF is doing, and you guys have been on a absolute growth trajectory, which is phenomenal. I think it sends a really positive message to the market. And it sort of sends the same message as I'm looking at in terms of the way that America and the international landscape views financial advice and financial services. And so in the Australian side, we're a little bit apprehensive, and a lot of big moves in the market are getting out of advice. But then I hear and see so much sort of this public, external, money coming in and these big plays happening. So I guess the question isn't what do you know that we don't know, but can you sort of let us in on, how you see advice in maybe in the next 5 years? That might be a good way to frame it.
I think there are some trends that are not specific to advice that are definitely playing to the what I call the strategic advantage of advice. And by that I mean, if you look at since the Industrial Revolution, I think in the last 100 or so years, we've seen economies go from making products. So if you go back to the sort of 40s and 50s and 60s, we used to make stuff. Then we moved into the 80s and 90s. It was a sales-oriented economy. We sold stuff. In wealth management, we sold products. We sold life insurance policies. We sold superannuation. Where we're heading now, and I think we've seen this in other industries, whether it's media or other more retail, we now create client experiences and create client outcomes, i.e., it's about taking capability, but creating a curated experience for clients. In wealth management, I think we call that advice. It starts with understanding your client. IOOF's purpose, which we've reviewed over the last 4 or 5 years, actually starts with understand me. Before we do anything, we need to understand our clients, understand me, look after me, secure my future. So that understanding orientation, that customization orientation plays directly into the hands of financial advice, because the advisors and the advice segment is the element that is closest to the client. Therefore, that's where the most knowledge and therefore the greatest value is for the client. From our perspective, this has been reinforced by a lot of the studies we've done. We did another value advice study late last year with 12,000 Australians. And every time the data is consistent. People who are in an advice relationship value the advice. They have better peace of mind, better financial confidence, and better overall well-being. So there is value in advice. The challenge is not enough people are benefiting from that, partly because there may be a lack of understanding what is advice. And I think there is a bit of confusion in that narrative. Is it about selling product? Is it about, do I need to be rich to get advice? I think there's an opportunity to improve the narrative of what advice really is, and get it into the hands of more people, but in a meaningful way. And again, I reiterate, I think in the past we've probably tried to take a financial advice offer for a pre-retiree or a 40 or 50-year-old and try to sort of, put a square peg in a round hole and market it to a 25-year-old. They're fundamentally different people with different needs at different points in their lives. So I'm not sure that's the best way to expand the horizons for advice. I think it starts with the client, understanding their needs and working backwards from there.
Yes, customization, I remember looking at a study not long ago, is what 98% of people desire in their offer. And that to me blows my mind. With what we do here at XY, we're kind of able to achieve that because we have a small amount of clients and we don't deal with the mass market. But as soon as you get to more than sort of 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million clients, customization becomes such a very difficult problem to solve. And I think the way that you've spoken about it in terms of tech being able to facilitate that customization is absolutely correct. And yet, if I look at what goes on, I don't actually see a lot. If I look to market, if I look at these fintech companies, I don't see a lot of customization. I see a lot of, You know what I see a lot of? I call it the koala mattress effect, where you can't take on Harvey Norman and provide everything. So you provide one thing really well, and these fintechs are sort of nailing that piece, but they're attracting a small audience and they're getting traction there. But in terms of being able to provide customization, I don't see a lot of that. Where do you think the way that you and your team are approaching things can facilitate that, as you mentioned, that customization, which I think is a very excellent strategy, but I also think it's really difficult to achieve. Where do you think, in terms of the tech and in terms of the strategy, like how do you think that IOOF will solve that better than, I guess, other companies who have tried to do in the past?
I think the real challenge, and this is, I think, the ultimate challenge, is what should be customized. And by that, I mean, what matters. So if I'll take Henry Ford and the Model T, which is one of my favorite sort of case studies. But, the customization of Henry Ford was that you could have any color as long as it's black.
Yeah.
Now, so there wasn't a lot of, prima facie, there wasn't a lot of customization there. That being said, the automobile he built let its customers go anywhere, anytime at their complete discretion. So it's really important to know what to customize. I think there are elements of the financial advice industry and participation where we've customized the wrong things. So we might customize an investment portfolio because we think that picking one manager over another is actually a point of difference in customization. But is that really what matters to the client? Or can you create a more homogenous system that improves the quality, reduces the cost of advice delivery, and then allows you to focus more energy and effort into the things that really matter to your customer and to your client? So I think it's really important to be clear on what are we looking to customize and why. So, and I suspect, certainly our experience, even within IOOF, I think in the past we've probably customized the wrong parts of the advice delivery value chain. And that of itself has created risks in terms of advice delivery and advice quality, when in fact creating better homogenized systems allows us to focus where it really matters, which is in front of the client and understanding our client's needs.
That's super interesting. Yes. I speak about this sort of a lot, but if there's two elements of financial advice that all financial advisors are always attempting to improve. And that number one is the client experience, and number two is efficiency of advice. And that sort of that dual purpose or those dual strategies are interlinked in terms of how do I make each client feel unique and special, and the journey that they go on is different from one person to the next, because using the Model T Ford as an analogy, a million different people want to end up in a million different locations. So no two people are the same. But at the same time, the rules and regulations and the compliance driven work needs to be done in a way that's safe, secure, compliant, and removing the risks. And the way that you spoke about the industry as a whole had sort of worked on the customization of that investment piece. And then we're kind of looking at it now in hindsight and saying, well, there's active and there's passive. And sure, there's different sectors. And yes, there's different, risk tolerances. But is using this boutique esoteric manager over here truly going to do everything that everyone in the whole financial advice value chain would be happy with? And yeah, the answer is definitely, clearly no, and for multiple reasons. So I think that there is, the way that I think about it is being good at investments and advice delivery and all that sort of, it's either the right or the left brain. I can never remember which one it is. The analytical side, it's ticket to the game, and it has to be done really well. And yet that experiential side, that whole idea that you can offer someone a different thing, is so vitally important to the delivery of advice. I've actually seen now a piece of tech that is the first bit of tech I've ever seen that's designed explicitly for that experiential side. And the first fintech I've ever seen that went down that line. And I thought that was super interesting. And so the way that they're sort of approaching it is advice is advice is advice. And that whole rules and regulations will never go away. But we're going to lean into this, you could call it the coaching side. And they've developed the tech to really pursue those questions that are unique and deliver an emotional experience. And I've only just seen this. This is like within a week or two. This is the first time I've seen something like this. Part of this XY podcast, we've been doing this for 5 years, hundreds of them. And a lot of people have spoken about it, but this is the first bit of tech I've ever seen that's done it. Is this kind of the area, or is this kind of the path that you and your team are thinking about taking?
It's the next frontier. Now we need to work our way to get there. And so I think one of the opportunities for IOOF is to bring our advisors and lead our advisors there and lead it together. So take their feedback, but work together to create that environment. But absolutely, I mean, having spent a lot of time with advisors and listening to advisors, some of the great experiences is you hear these stories of the client calling up an advisor to get the advisor to help him go and buy a new car because they value his opinion.
Yes.
Financial advice is about enabling and unlocking the emotional benefit of life in a lot of ways. It's the confidence, it's the peace of mind, and being able to actively make decisions with confidence in their broader lives. It's more than just the alphas and the betas and the gammas. And that's the piece that I think is the real opportunity in financial advice. And I think that's the piece that will unlock greater benefit in society. If we've got more people with fewer financial concerns, which can manifest by way of mental illness and other health problems, unlocking that, I think, is ultimately the societal benefit that will come from financial advice.
Absolutely. One of my clients invited me to their citizenship ceremony along with their family and I think a couple of close friends. And I got invited as well. And there's not a file, like how do you write a file note about that? You know, like how do you stick that in an SOA? And I the concept that we're talking, that you're like the head of such a large financial services company, talking the way that you're talking, and then referring to the concept that of the next frontier, and then, you know, piecing that together with the scalability idea. I'm kind of picturing what your C-suite conversations are. Like it's a truly unique concept. You know, if I think about it, I was with Hill Ross with AMP. The way that they kind of tried to solve it was, I guess, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but the way that you explained it earlier with old thinking, new ways, it was always kind of, I was thinking the stuff that you're trying to achieve has already been achieved by advisors. And now the language you're using is different. It's very different. And it explains to me why IOOF are so bullish on advice. And to me, like, this is one of to advisors at least, it's great to hear this story that the momentum is in the way of advice to more people. And the way that you explained it before with the advisor being the closest to the client, I think is an extremely smart way to go about it. One of the things, whenever I see a fintech pop up and their whole idea is to, hey, you don't need an advisor, I just go, it's the classic mistake. Like, and then it's always, 24 months later, oh, actually, now we're working with advisors, right? And I think if you and your team approaching this with the advisor, and then how to get an advisor in front of more and more people, I think that is a great premise, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, well, we both are. No, we're very, very excited. And these, that one of the things, again, we talk about is we do take a short and long-term perspective on our business. And we're conscious that, as I said, the organisation's been around 170 years. And you made reference to there being a lot more friendly societies in the past than they are today. There's probably a handful today. One of the things we're very conscious of is the reason that IOOF has been able to prosper is because we've faced into change. We've challenged ourselves to change and to adapt. And there are many others that didn't adapt, and they failed to be relevant, continue to be relevant to the changing society and communities. We're hell bent on making sure we continue to be relevant, and that means we need to challenge ourselves into a world that will be consumer driven. The consumer will have the power. The consumer will elect who to engage with and why. And as we discussed earlier, I think a lot of that will be based on customizations and us being relevant to them. Because access to different solutions is being democratized, the cost of engaging, the cost of client acquisition is dropping. So I think we need to make sure that our business model is relevant to a changing world.
Absolutely. A concept that I've been thinking about more and more is, and this is sort of heading back to the Chris Hemsworths, but the Australians with large audiences, and those audiences often follow the directions of these. I guess that's why they're called influencers. There's a lot that's happened in terms of financial services, which live in the the unregulated realm. Things like Bitcoin, things like off-market transactions, and a lot of this is happening. And I'm sure you've probably followed this. The GameStop, the GME stock. There's clearly a desire for financial engagement. I think the fact that financial planning kind of around the world hasn't been able to ingrain themselves in a larger portion of the population than, say, 10 or 15%, I think is the idea that we've only really attracted people that think a certain type of way. And it's certainly not that there aren't people that want to be involved in finance, but just consider the traditional way of doing everything as not being particularly interesting. And so whatever the future of personal finance looks like, I don't know, but it is an exciting idea to hear that large corporations are, in fact, keeping their finger on the pulse and want to ensure that advice succeeds and leaps into, if I dare call it, the next age. I obviously don't understand the next 5 years business plan for IOOF, but at least what we've talked about today, it does sound like a good leadership position to take. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think, to the question of the next 5 years, I'll break that down to a couple of different horizons. One is the next couple of years, which is about removing the legacy of the past model and recreating or setting a new foundation for the future. So much of what we're doing in Advice and Advice 2.0, removing the subsidies, making that business economically viable, investing in technology, is really about baselining for the future and really letting go of the past. It served us well to a point, but I think, if you keep on hanging on to that, it will actually be a millstone around your neck. So we are looking to create a new foundation that is going to set up for the new set of expectations. And then beyond that, it is about really growing. It's growing the number of advisors we serve. It's growing the number of clients those advisors serve, and be that through financial advice and our advice licensees, or be it engaging with superannuation clients in a far more meaningful way. There's a conversation that's more than just about investment returns, that's actually more oriented towards their life needs and their own personal circumstances.
Absolutely. One of the things I've always considered, especially from an advice point of view, is that the documentation that clients receive from their product providers could be substantially more interesting. So for example, ESG is such a big trend, right? Why wouldn't, for example, IOOF interview one of the companies that's in the ESG fund, right? And just make the CEO or someone in the company who's willing to speak, interview them, and then stick that letter in the documentation. It's not difficult, but the person, rather than looking at a pie chart with the color orange on it and blue and purple and numbers between 1% and 5%, it's an actual conversation with something that they're invested in. And it's the simplest thing possible, but I've just never seen something like that occur.
Yeah, look, I think we've got a long way to go to in terms of communication, particularly here in Australia. I think if you look at other geographies, and the US is one that stands out to me, where I think they have far more innovative and effective ways to communicate. I think there's a lot more we can do here. For example, why is an SOA a 50 to 80 page document and not a video, not a 4-minute video or 10-minute video if necessary? But I think there's an opportunity to embrace new technologies. One of the benefits of having gone through 2020 and the pandemic is I'm sure that the use of Zooms for reviews, for new client appointments, for fact finds has gone through the roof. That's a real positive. Yes. So how do we continue to build on that? How do we use transcripting capabilities? How do we use digital capabilities to not only help in the compliance process, but actually help us deliver better insights?
Yeah.
And these are some things that have existed in call centers and other parts of our business and other businesses for quite a long period of time. Whether it's digital analytics, voice analytics, to help us improve our own business. And it feels like that level of industrialization just hasn't occurred yet in financial advice. So we see that as a massive opportunity.
Yeah. Do you think that's just everyone's terrified of ASIC and everyone's just, to me, it just seems like everyone's so frozen with fear that any kind of, I think also like because there's been so much that has occurred in the past and so many penalties have been handed down and everyone's so terrified that they're just going to get singled out that progress is sort of, it's restricted. Do you see?
No, I probably have a slightly different view, which is if you look at the model of the past, which was banks or wealth managers were in advice to sell products. So it was a distribution channel. They were prepared to loss lead. Therefore, it was hard to get investment into those channels because it wasn't seen as a proposition in its own right. It was simply a means to sell product.
Right.
I think if you fast forward to where we are now, I think there's ourselves and there are maybe one or two others who have the capacity and the willingness to invest into some of these systems and capabilities, but there aren't a lot of others, and I think that's the challenge. The challenge is, I mean, we've acquired the Wealth Central technology, so that's we spent tens of millions of dollars in that transaction. But if you look at the Australian landscape, there aren't that many organisations that can invest tens of millions of dollars in the development of the next generation of advice systems. So I think that's the real challenge is which organisation is going to invest those funds. And I think as an advisor, that is a consideration.
Such a good point. Had not thought of it. That makes so much more sense. The Wealth Central, just quickly, they're the guys with the VR, right?
They've been piloting a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah, virtual reality is one of them, yes.
Yeah, I've had a go. It looks cool. Mate, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Like I said, I've been watching what you and your team have been doing, just publicly watching the moves. And it's been an absolute pleasure to get to sit down with you and ask you all about it. So, I really just wanted to thank you for coming on.
No, pleasure. And likewise, as I've said, we've watched with interest your own growth and development of XY Advisor. And it's been great.
Awesome, mate. Thanks a lot.
Well, there you have it, another episode of the XY Advisor podcast. I'm Fraser Jack, and I'm joined with Emily Blanche. G'day.
Hey, Fraser. How are you?
I'm tremendous. Thank you for asking. And it's one of my favourite parts of the week when we start doing some shout-outs.
You and me both. So today, I want to give a massive shout-out to the Cobalt Advisor licensee. These guys kicked off their own group on the platform a little while ago, and I've been watching it go from strength to strength. It's become a place for their advisors to share resources, collaborate, ask questions. And I was lucky enough to jump in on one of their group meetings and give the crew, all the advisors in Cobalt, a virtual tour. So I was able to walk their new members through their group, how to get the most out of it, but also how to use the wider platform as well, because there are so many resources and things and value and discussions to take that they can make use of. So it was an awesome session, a lot of fun, and to see a modern forward-thinking licensee doing something like this is it's what XY is all about.
So there you go. Big shout out to the Cobalt licensee group. Wow, well done for using the platform the way it's meant to be used. Essentially, the XY platform is designed to be able to set up these sorts of things and groups and courses and different things. So if you're jump on the XY app, you can jump into the section, have a look at the different groups, and you can join those groups. If you're an XY Plus member, you can start your own group and facilitate some great conversation within that group. That's the end of this episode. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.